Hey there, foreigners. This is Rohit from BreakingTheBorders.com, home of the ambitious immigrants. Today's guest is a communications expert. And to be honest with you, I don't think I should be interviewing him. I think I should be working with him to improve my podcasting skills. And he is Arjun Bakshi. He teaches entrepreneurs and business leaders how to be a better communicators and leaders. And today he's going to teach us how an immigrant can adapt their speaking style to be more appropriate for an American audience. I'm very excited to be talking to Arjun today. Arjun, welcome to Breaking the Borders.
Rohit, it is a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Arjun. Thanks for coming along. So tell us what your background and relation is to communication. Why do we need to listen to you?
Okay, absolutely. So let me share what I'm doing today at this moment, and then I can share how I got there really briefly. So at this moment, I'm a business and communication consultant. I work with some tech companies. I've had a few Fortune 500 clients, and mostly I work with startups and people who are creating their organization, their team, their product, their brand. And what I also do, which I've done for almost 10 years, is I am a university professor in communication, and I teach courses like public speaking, cultural communication, debate, and so on.
So what do you teach entrepreneurs?
So with entrepreneurs, I teach, first of all, we start with their business strategy. Who is their customer? How should we communicate with the customer? And a lot of them, are trying to understand how to connect to a multicultural audience. And so that's where I bring my core competencies, the culture and the speak. So we have the culture as in connecting with all different kinds of people, and also the speak, which is phrasing yourself, speaking loudly and clearly, and speaking with some kind of conviction to persuade somebody to take actions or to change their attitudes.
Got it. So there is actually a second meaning to the culture of speak. I just realized that when you said it, the culture of people speaking and its culture of
You got it. That's exactly what the name means. Thank you.
That's a good one. Yeah. Got it. So, what has it been like you before you figured this out, right? Were you always like a good speaker, or did you have to learn it?
That's a good question. I would say, Rohit, that I was very much encouraged by my parents, especially my father, who had in his college days been a speaker on the stage, and he had been in dramas, and he won a few prizes as an actor. So there was a lot of that in my home growing up, and we were encouraged to take part in out of class activities, extracurricular activities. So when one fine day I was asked by my school to, be the master of ceremonies for a pageant at our elementary school, I found that I was not facing stage fright. I was not facing communication anxiety, just as a means of communicating with a large group of people. So with that not being a barrier, I was able to start actually the journey. And I always see it as a journey. It's to be very clear, the fifth grade Arjun and this Arjun at a mature age, we are both the same in that we know that there are better and more powerful ways to communicate. And so it's just that we are further along in the journey.
So you were a great speaker or good speaker back in India, and then you moved to the US. So did that experience continue here? Were you a good speaker here as well?
That's the funny thing, actually, Rohit, because I found very quickly that when I came here for my studies and masters, and I got my master's in communication, that while I did eventually figure a few things out, it wasn't so easygoing. It wasn't easygoing in the beginning. And so, for instance, what I was finding was things like the vocabulary I was using. I was finding that the tone I was using, I was finding that my relationship to the audience was not connecting with people. And so, for example, I remember I was giving a class presentation. So this is during my studies. And the professor was very happy with me. And so they gave me a good grade for the presentation. But the audience didn't really care. They weren't laughing, or they weren't smiling or nodding with appreciation at the ideas, and not much applause. And so that bothered me, not because I'm looking for the applause from my ego, but because that means you just didn't succeed. You didn't connect with the audience.
Yeah, why is that important to you? Why is the audience applause something that you valued?
Well, and simply put, Rohit, it is the purpose of what you are going out to achieve. With any speaking activity, we think of communication as the same root word for communication is the word that goes into community. So communicate. We are doing something together. If what I'm doing in my communicative activity is not having any significant effect or not having a positive significant effect on the people listening to me, either the message I am speaking is not being understood or it is not being agreed with. In both cases, as a communicator, I have not done my job. So it is not a question of ego, like, oh my goodness, wow, I love the applause, right? And it's not about that. It's as simple as this. If you show some advertisements on TV and the showing of those advertisements don't get people to buy your product, you don't make money, right? And so it's not about, wow, I made a great ad. It's like, oh, good. People, understand what our product's about or what our brand's about. And now they are loyal to us as customers.
Yeah. So being a speaker all your life, so being seen as a good speaker, someone who can do that is very important to you. And that was not what you were when you first gave your speech in that class. Is that what you are trying to say?
I kind of am. And I think what I'm saying is Rohit, that the audience was always important to me. But I think what I'm trying to share with you as part of the immigrant experience of the person who was born in a different country, right, as you well put it up, is that what worked in India where I grew up or what would have worked in different parts of Asia is not what works in the US. And that was the big understanding and the big, light bulb moment, if you will. Right. And this is a perfect example. What did I just do? I said light bulb moment. I used for you a metaphor or an idiom as opposed to the literal explanation of realization or anything like that. This is something, and just a quick tangent. American speak uses all these kinds of terms. We nailed it. It's not like you took a hammer and a nail and you did something in the wall. You succeeded. Slam dunk, right? Basketball term. And so in the US, we use a lot of these kinds of terms. And this was a huge barrier in the beginning for me. But as you and I will discover in this talk, there were many other things that I had to switch, which I'm happy to share with the audience today.
Yeah. So that's a great segue into what we are doing next. So you had some gaps in your communication versus how the best speakers here would do it like in the US. And you obviously reached there now because you're getting paid to teach it to other people. So there are certain steps that you need to take to get there, right? So let's start with one. What is the first thing that you need to do differently as an immigrant, being a good speaker elsewhere? What is the first thing that you need to adjust?
Absolutely. I would say the first thing, not in terms of priority, but in terms of, what is coming to mind, is a delivery pattern. To give you an idea, delivery pattern can be from different points of view. What we were taught, especially in India, and what is accepted even in Europe and Great Britain, is what is called a manuscript delivery. Manuscript delivery is where you write it in the form of an essay on a piece of paper, and to some extent, you can just read from that paper and people will not really fault you for it, right? Another version that people use in Asia is memorized delivery. So with that, what they will do is they will, remember all the words pretty much in the right, order, and they will practice a very stage type of voice, a specific kind of tone and voice that has a very staged feel to it, because that is what is accepted by the audience, right? Culturally determined. In the US, they don't like those kinds of things. They want, first of all, to use less ums, ers, likes, those kinds of fillers. And they also prefer the shorter sentence. What often, in writing classes, students will do, and this is exactly what speakers do, is you'll have the sentence and you keep putting the word and or the word but and joining the next thought to it, run-on sentences. That is one thing that is not easily accepted or does not lead to success in the US. Because in the US, you want to speak almost like you're having a conversation. And that is what is called extemporaneous delivery, where you don't memorize it word for word, you memorize it idea for idea, and then you speak like a heightened conversation.
Yeah. So is there any example that you can give that you where you implemented this that made a difference for?
Absolutely. I think I could take you back to my school days again, my college days again, where I was still practicing this. I remember I was taking part in this speech tournament as a student, and all the other students were all the same year and the same grade as me, and this is in the U.S. And I remember, we had this speech round. So you had round one, whoever got the best score from the judges went to round two, and then you went all the way till the finals. And so the way it was structured is you were giving the same exact speech, but just with different competitors in that room. So in essence, whoever reached the final had given their speech at least 3 to 4 times. I was finding that each time I'm saying my speech, I had memorized it word for word, but I was finding that just naturally I was modifying certain parts of it because I had seen the audience reactions to certain ideas or certain jokes or certain expressions. And I was able to say, okay, this I should keep, this I should cut out, this I should keep, this I should cut out. I should spend more time on this, I should spend less time on this. And so that ability to phrase things on the spot, but have the idea very clearly in your mind. That is what extemporaneous speaking basically is. When it came to the final round, I was able to go almost completely from a highly formal type of speaking to a moderately formal, semi-informal type of speaking. So I had made the transition in the tournament itself from the very Indian formal style where I am the great speaker, right, to let's have a conversation. And believe it or not, the topic itself was a tricky one. I had picked, why we shouldn't be binge drinking.
Okay.
Right. That was actually the topic I picked up.
Yeah. I saw your other speech on alcohol on your website.
That's the one.
Is that a topic that you're passionate about?
I was, especially because in my first few years in the US, whether it's on TV or, people around me, just in the general culture, this was something, oh, I got so wasted, right? It's something that everybody would, say on TV or wherever they were. And so this used to concern me. And, as I said in that speech, actually, to give you a quick detail, was that people didn't know that actually they had no choice because the biology of human body and the psychology of the human mind was preventing them from having any control in their decision making. So they were incapable of knowing when to stop.
Yeah. Yeah. So that is one of the things I realized as well. So every time in college, when I moved here for Penn State in 2008, every time there was something about going out or having fun, it was always about drinking and going to the bars. I enjoyed drinking, but I didn't like going to the bars, dancing in the loud music. And that kind of slowed down my social interactions.
Absolutely. I was speaking, and this is another thing that, has helped me throughout my speaking career, Rohit, is that I always speak from a place of concern and social goodwill. And so it's a very sincere desire on my part to help other people. And that I have found is something that has translated very well from Indian context to US context.
Got it. Yeah. So moving right along, what is the next thing that we can do differently in speaking?
Absolutely. So I would say one major change that most people struggle with, and that's why they lose the audience attention, especially in meetings, is the difference in the structure of your ideas. So, for instance, in Asia, we have, and parts of Africa, we have what is called spiral or circular forms of organizing your ideas. A very famous example of it would be, uh, Dr. Martin Luther King, right? When he did his I Have a Dream speech. So it's like he has this phrase and this core idea, and he keeps building up momentum around it and keeps saying, I have a dream, and then adds a few lines, and then I have a dream, and he adds a few lines, right? And so that would be very literal. But a more typical version of it would be where you keep talking about the dream or an idea or a solution to a problem, right? And that is, a repetitive something that you build upon, but it's something where you allow for adding a lot of background context and background information. Really, though, what you're doing to achieve that is many times, especially in Asian context, you separate yourself as a speaker from the situation. So that's why you talk in terms of one should not do this, we should not do this, as opposed to I don't think we should do this, right? You separate yourself by one step from the problem or the topic or the situation at hand. In US context, they prefer a much more linear structure. Introduction, body, conclusion, problem, solution, cause, effects, right? And so that is something with a lot of different, they like what is called a very clear roadmap. So for instance, the way we teach it in the classrooms is you give an introduction and then you give a preview. These are the things I will tell you about. Then you tell them, and then these are the things I have just finished telling you about per summary, and then you conclude. So this shift from a very spiral, circular type of structure to a low context, linear structure. That's a huge change people have to make.
Got it. So do you have any, you used to give speeches also in the spiral structure when you were back in India?
Yeah, and I would say I don't know necessarily if I fit a classic spiral the way I would do it, but definitely what it did work out to was it was not straight linear. It was definitely more like a curvilinear, I would say, with a lot of as we would put it, humps and valleys, right?
I see.
Because what would happen is our speaking in India is derived from British Parliament style of speaking. Right, because the definition of speaking and rhetoric used to be great men speaking well. Emphasis on men speaking well, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously, that has changed for the good. Now everybody has the right to speak about various things. But the reason why that was so powerful was that when a so-called great man is speaking, you don't question their style. You just allow them to speak their opinion. And hopefully from their great intelligence, they will tell you something that is useful to you. So that is why this structure became a habit by the end of it. And this takes us to the next step.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you, right? So it's when great men speak well, it's very serious and boring in a way. So
exactly.
What do you have to, how do you modify that?
Absolutely. Well, how you have to modify it if you want to be understood by a US audience is you have to speak like a regular guy, right? You have to speak like somebody who is no different from an audience member, not better, not more educated. And all that you have is a different perspective. That is the key. You are unique as a speaker, not because you are more intelligent or more educated, but because you have a different perspective, a different way of seeing the things. And that is what makes you unique and qualifies you to speak.
But you're still one in them, is what you're
saying. Exactly. And so the specific small ways in which you modify your speaking style to do that is, first of all, vocabulary. So I don't know if this is your experience, but in a lot of Asian countries, again, because of British influence, you are expected to use very high level, complicated vocabulary, right? And that is, in fact, a sign of intelligence, a sign of good education. What is dangerous sometimes, and I have experienced this in growing up, is sometimes one will forget the actual meaning of the word and use it in the wrong situation.
You said you have experienced it as a child. What is that you have experienced? Can you tell more about
Well,
that?
I think, it would happen whether it was at school, and, we used to have debate and speech at school. And so someone would say something to the effect of, they meant to say disagreement between people. I forget the exact word at this moment, but they ended up saying the word that meant disagreement with oneself. Right. And so, because so many of the words people would use were words that great philosophers had used many hundreds and thousands of years ago, which no one had looked up recently, and no one is going to question you. So you use the word that you want to use.
No one knows it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So when I prepared for GRE to come to the US for my master's,
Yes.
all the words that I learned, I used to shove them in here and there. So for the worst usage of that word was for someone who stopped drinking, I believe. A friend of mine who's quit drinking, I told that he was refurbished or something like that.
That is a very good personal example.
Yeah, but refurbished is used generally for things, right?
Exactly.
Not for people.
Very good. I can tell you an example that actually happened in the US not very long ago. A friend of mine, and this is to do with Silicon Valley culture, right? Where a word can be taken from the original English context and completely bastardized. And so the word was used, deconstruct, right? Today, people use it in the meaning of analyze. That if you analyze, you are deconstructing. That is not what that word means. That word is to mean that it takes away the persuasive influence of something which is powerful on you in a way that you are not even consciously aware. So, for example, a great example of deconstructing is if you see a commercial with a beautiful lady saying, you must eat this hamburger. It is so good. See, I'm a supermodel. I'm eating this hamburger. And if you, as a viewer, you say, ha ha, as if eating the hamburger will get me a beautiful lady as a date, right? And if you openly say that, that is what deconstruction means, because you have rendered it useless. The ad has no power over you now.
I see. Yeah.
That is what deconstruction means.
Oh, I didn't know that. One of the people I admire, Tim Ferriss, uses that word a lot. He says, but he uses it in the wrong context, I believe, now that you say it.
Well, because again, to be fair, words change meanings from context. So I'm probably being a bit harsh, but the origin of that word is in philosophical context.
Got it. That's where it was originated, but now it's used in different contexts, which is fine too, as long as it's the common understanding of the people around.
Exactly.
Yeah. Got it. So how about making the speech more engaging? What are the elements that we can include to make it, more personable or more interesting?
Absolutely. So you have to almost think of, your speech in terms of sections. And so going from what we just talked about, the linear structure versus the spiral structure, once you arrange your ideas from a beginning, a middle, and end, a problem and a solution, or a cause and an effect, and then create subpoints from that, what you essentially have to do to be powerful and successful is you want to keep telling the audience where we are in the speech or what you were thinking. So, for instance, an example would be, let's say I'm giving a speech on why you should donate to a charity. Okay. I'm trying to persuade you, right? So at each point, now that I've mentioned to you, supposing I'm in the middle, now that I've mentioned to you how the charity successfully and transparently manages its money, what I'd like to tell you about next is all the different regional partners that the charity uses. This is what you would call a transition, right? It tells us, it reminds the audience in a summarized format what I've just told them and gives them a preview of the next idea that I'm about to share with them. Okay. And so that would be a very powerful thing that you sort of sandwich between every, say, paragraph or so in the different parts of the speech.
Okay. How about including humor in the speech?
Absolutely. I would say that was one of the biggest things I had to work on, because my humor in the way I grew up and was speaking in India, it could be much more, shall we say, subtle, and it could be a lot less in quantity, quite frankly. But here, what you almost have to do is you have to see that how serious and technical is my content. I have to use humor, and a good way you can do it is by using analogies that are funny, right? So, for instance, a very typical place where you'll see this is if people are talking about, let's say, the economic crisis that happened in 2007, right? An example would be that, let's say you said, it's like if I took the coins you had, right? And I gave some to you, kept a few, then put three here, then did three more here. You reduce it to something every day, right? That's the point of an analogy. You talk about coins, and then you show people how confusing and convoluted that transaction would be just in a matter of coins between two friends. And so then that, creates the ridiculousness or the humor in how that crisis was mishandled.
I see. So
Yeah.
humor is more important here in the US than elsewhere, is what you're saying.
Definitely, because that goes back to, what we were saying earlier, that, people like you to be on their level. You want to be relatable, just like them, only with a different perspective.
Yeah.
You are not a great person, greater than them or more important than them.
Yeah.
Unless, of course, you're the president. But even the president, as you see, he is forced to do a lot of what is called self-deprecating humor.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is a definite European way of thinking that, I'm not important. I'm just a regular guy. Right. And so all the humor you'll see is like, for instance, the president will sometimes say, oh, yeah, I'm all this. I did this today and I did this today. But you know what? Michelle tells us what to watch for TV, something silly and funny like that, just to bring down his sense of importance and to make the audience feel comfortable with him, right? That's really the other thing. So you're breaking away in the economics example. The first purpose of the humor is you are making complex things easy to understand, and you're showing how ridiculous something can be. And the other purpose of humor is self-deprecation. I'm not important. Don't think I'm too important. Or more importantly, I don't think I'm important. Right.
Got it. So before this call, we were chatting and you mentioned there is the type of humor is also different, right? It's more relatable and egocentric versus simplistic back home.
Very true.
Yeah.
Very
Can
true.
you talk about that?
Yeah. So I couldn't speak for everybody, but definitely, when we talked about, jokes and things like that, in Indian and Asian context, jokes were much more prepared. Jokes were, shall we say, many of them used from sarcastic point of view. There was a lot of irony in them, and which some of that does translate over to US context. But I have found that a lot of humor is very idiomatic. It is very based on very specific references. And so, for instance, like someone might say something like they jumped the shark, all right, which is a reference to a TV show called Happy Days, right, where the key character of the show literally on water skis jumped over a shark. People thought that was stupid, and they gave up watching the show. The show got cancelled, right? And so people use a lot of these very key idiomatic references that, as a new arrival to the country, you're found scratching your head, and you're the only one not laughing in the room, right, as the audience. So often that'll happen, right? But I think this is what I would share, that the humor is much more referential to specific popular culture and to historical context, right? And I think the humor, while not being an expert on it, has a lot of emphasis on self-deprecation. I don't think I'm important. And most importantly, in use of analogies and in making, in using it to show powerful people in a ridiculous light. That is a very powerful and common usage of humor, that these powerful people, kings, queens, presidents, secretaries of state, all these other important people, look at what they did. How simple and foolish are they, right? So bringing power down to our level, again, deprecation.
Got it.
That would be a very powerful form of humor.
Got it. So if someone wants to, is there anything else before I ask you this question? Is there anything else that you would like to share about the steps to be a better speaker?
Certainly. I think, one thing that has proved very successful is, you are always connecting your key central idea to anything you might say. So you have to have a very key central idea, which some people call the thesis statement, right? In your writing styles, your essays, that's what they call it. The thesis is basically a question that your speech is answering. And so each portion of the speech, because it's linear, right, has to very closely match the parameters of the thesis. And in the end of it, you have to basically spell out the answer for your audience. You have to spell it out for them in the clearest terms. This is what we have learned today. And the last thing you leave them with must be what is called the call to action. That this is what you can do, and what Maslow called self-actualization, where you can actually take power into your own hands and go out and change your life or your experience.
Mm-hmm. So today we talked about a lot about what someone listening can do, right? Can we still have a call to action in this moment right now?
Absolutely.
What would it be if there was one?
Well, I'm first of all a very happy and friendly person, so I'm sure you can contact me. My email is arjun@cultureofspeak.com. Please feel free to contact me if you'd like to know more about speaking, and we can have a conversation. If you'd just like to learn on your own, and some people enjoy doing that, I think the TED videos, the TEDx videos are a pretty decent way to understand the American style of speaking. And
so are you talking about a particular TEDx video or just in general, just to get the context of things?
Very good point. I would say that certainly not each TEDx video is perfect. Some that I have found to be particularly useful would be, for example, Susan Cain's video on introvert behavior, and which is a little bit longer. It's 18 minutes, but still gets the point across really well. I think the people of TED have also, invested a lot in how to deliver a TED talk, right? And I think that might actually be probably the most useful thing, not to necessarily become a great speaker because there's so much involved, but just to understand what is sort of the modern American and young American, especially mindset towards public speaking and what that entails.
That's a great point. When I hear those TED Talks, they're so smooth. It feels like they ironed it out for weeks or months, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, think about it. To reach that level where you're actually recorded on video and put on the internet, so many people have, not made that cut. So it's only after you've done your training, you've met requirements, you've been cleared by, I believe they have people who sort of, coach you or are at least, approve or disapprove of your speech. So then, if they approve, you make it till the final rounds. I think, I'm not necessarily endorsing them that they're the perfect speakers, but I think it's definitely an educational resource you can look into.
Got it. So for someone, I will leave the link to the TED video and Arjun's contact in the show notes. And is there any other book or a resource that you can mention for a self-learner?
Certainly. I think, there's probably not one book that is better than others necessarily, but one that has, that I've used in universities and I feel is really clear and gets the point across quite well, I would say is Art of Public Speaking by Lucas. And it's a pretty popular book. And I think for beginners, even if you're 18 years old or 15 years old, or if you're 50 or 80, it doesn't matter. I think in a very easy to understand way. It gives you the basics of public speaking. And because it's written by an American or by an American, North American context, it does give you some sense of what might be required of you.
So what do you think about my interviewing, Arjun? Is there anything I can do to be better?
Well, Rohit, I think I've had a great experience with you. You've asked some really smart questions. You've checked up, and figured out what my abilities are and what my background is, and kept us on track all the time. And you're always, what I love about your style, which is, a mark of a good interviewer, you're using your voice to speak for the audience, because you're always trying to think what more can the audience get out of this experience. And you're always asking questions that take us towards that. So I have nothing but good things to say for you.
Oh, okay. Great to hear. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Rohit, and thank you to our audience.
Thanks everyone for joining today. I hope you learned something from it. I know I did. And all the show notes with the links mentioned can be found at breakingtheborders.com/session 4. And if you found anything of value here, I'll be very thankful if you leave an iTunes rating and review. Thank you so much, and I'll see you another day.